Well, meditation is a practice that is focused on the mind. So the possibly you could say the preamble to that is a yoga practice in the postural sense. So doing yoga postures in order to lead you into an easeful state so you can practice meditation.
Yeah.
And I think that meditation's practiced now a lot more commonly because there's so much mental angst in people's lives, collectively and individually. And it's a gateway into a different way of being. It's a different mode of operation. So rather than being in fight and flight or on the to-do list and hung up on arguments or personal problems that people are having, there's a way to not push it away, but to experience something different whilst still in your life. So it's not just sitting and closing your eyes, it's you're activating things internally, and that has an effect on how you feel, and how you feel has an effect on how you live. So it's a practice which has lots of different traditions and lots of techniques, so many schools of thought around how best to change the patterns of our mind. A lot of what we think is habitual. A lot of our daily thoughts are repeated, regurgitated dialogue from yesterday, and it's yoga and meditation is a practice to break those habit patterns that aren't productive for us anymore, which is a lot of them. So it's used to calm the mind, and when we calm the mind, we can realize other faculties, things that are available to us that we're not able to access when we're in a stressed state. So that's a bit of a background.
Well explained. Wow. Yeah, you're right. It does open up other channels, doesn't it? Because we put so much effort subconsciously into dealing with the stress and the busyness and the chatter that we're not open to other possibilities. So I like the way you explain that.
Yeah, I'm glad it made sense.
Yeah. So how do we change the same thoughts then? We'd have to obviously purposefully do that in our work, in our meditation and yoga. As we sort of in that process, how do we change the thoughts? We just put a mantra in, or just say, okay, I'm going to work on this or that. If we want to reset.
Yeah. So what happens, I think, with thoughts is that they're automatic. Very often the thoughts come. We don't plan what we're going to think. If you sit and close your eyes ready for meditation, you don't know what thoughts are going to pop in your head, and you don't know how long they'll be there and the next thing that will come. So really, it's not that you change your thoughts, but you change where your attention goes. So your attention can be on the thoughts, but you're aware of that. So attention is different to thinking. Attention is a separate thing. So you can choose to focus on your thoughts as a technique of meditation. You can focus on, okay, this is coming in, that's going out, but not identifying, or what Mooji, one of the great spiritual teachers, says, you don't combine with the thought. You let the thought happen and it goes, and then the next one and the next one. And so it's not that you're changing your thoughts. It doesn't work. You let them happen. And if you have a different technique of meditation, like mantra meditation, which you mentioned, which is closely aligned with the TM movement, then you focus on the mantra and thoughts still come. But those thoughts are going to happen anyway. You just choose to refocus your attention back onto the mantra. So it's not that you manipulate yourself into thinking certain things. That's a different, like auto-suggestion and things, and there is a practice within yoga called Yoga Nidra, where we can use a sankalpa, which is like a positive intention. That's a deliberate thought. That's different. So you can use your mind to create deliberate patterns of thought, very, very specifically. And then on the other hand, you just let them happen. It's like breathing. We can change the way we breathe. We can change the pattern of our breath. We can change the depth of our breath. We have a certain bandwidth that we can operate within with the breath. But you can't say to yourself, I'm going to stop breathing and I'm just going to stop. I'm not going to breathe again. Well, you will. Sooner or later you'll pass out and you'll breathe if you get to that point. So it's the same with our thinking. You can say, I'm not going to think, I'm not going to think, I'm not going to think, and then sooner, it's a very subtle, slippery thing, and the thought will slide in underneath or out from the back door, and you'll be thinking again. So it's not something we try and stop. We just can't do that. So we use it and transcend it. We can drop below that pattern of thinking, not up here, vibrating so high.
Yeah, it's all about that attachment, isn't it? Not attaching to the thoughts. That's what we hear, don't we?
It's so hard though. It's not an easy process. I mean, it gets easier with practice for sure. We don't take our thoughts so seriously. And actually, it reminds me of a book I once read by, you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember his name. He was a Tibetan Lama, and the book's called Don't Believe Everything You Think. Because we're so convinced that what we're thinking is the truth. And it's not the truth, it's your thoughts. They might offer some help, but not always. Very often they don't.
And it's good to remember that when people are having that negative self-talk about oneself. I remember J-Lo saying on one of the Ellen DeGeneres shows years ago, they were interviewing her and in the green room before she spoke to Ellen, and she was saying to the person, I get that she gets insecure and she doubts herself. She thinks, is she good enough? Because obviously there's so much competition out there in that industry, acting and singing and dancing. So even though she's at the top, or she was at the top, or maybe she's still at the top, I'm not sure, but she was saying she's always scared. She's always living in that fear that she's not good enough, and can she do better? And if she thinks she's doing well, maybe people are laughing behind her back. And I thought, really? J-Lo? But of course, she's human. Why would I even doubt it? I mean,
amazing, isn't it?
But the persona they put on, I think she's even got a Netflix show out called Halftime, which I'd like to see, because she sort of reveals a lot there.
Yeah,
she's very open.
I think that negative self-talk happens to everybody, and it can be paralyzing. But clearly, she's found a way to work within it, and still be able to perform in that way, and be admired by millions of people. I think that the negative self-talk that happens, which definitely can come up in meditation, needs to be handled gently. Like the reason we sit in meditation is to discover these things, oh my gosh, I'm actually really hard on myself. I'm actually just chained to my to-do list like it's the next religion. I really have this sense of foreboding that I haven't done everything, I haven't said all I should to that person, or that all comes up. But it needs to be embraced with a kind attitude. Like being able to bring that, what we call, to the light of awareness. Your awareness is the light. Being aware of it and then holding it with love, not with rejection. Because if we start rejecting those parts of ourselves, they just get stronger, and sooner or later it will explode, or it will show up in your life in other ways.
So can you say that bit again about the light? Because I think it was so important. We just need to hear it again about the light, with that light part.
So our awareness or our consciousness is what we're working with in meditation. And when we stay more aligned or identified with the awareness that we are, rather than the thoughts themselves or the situations in your life, we've got the chance to cast light on it. Our awareness is like light, like it shines. Our awareness is the light. Where we look, what we see, what we perceive, is because we're shining light on it with our attention. So in meditation, if we have that awareness, that expansive awareness, we take in everything that is our experience without rejecting it and without fighting it, and being able to welcome it. Even if you don't like it, welcome it.
Interesting.
Because that's the darkness, right? That's the shadow side of ourselves that can come up at that time. And the more we get to know it, the less scary it becomes. So nothing can threaten our awareness. Our awareness is always there, always present.
True. Yeah, and I'll just tie in two things you said. with that, to just backtrack a little bit, you said the to-do list is a religion, can be a religion. You know, we can get a bit obsessed with it and attached to it. And the other thing you said is, you know, that, you know, I haven't said something or this or that to someone. Like it's just reminds me that people want to do the right thing. They want to be perfect. Let's say, I don't like using that word, but you know, aim at striving to get things right. The to-do list, perfection. Don't want to offend this person. To keep the relationships good. Too much pressure. Oh, what did I say to that person? Sometimes there's that self-doubt. You know, in perhaps a situation of conflict, whether it be with family or work, in the workplace, and people sort of going through the conversation in their mind and saying, should I have said that? Should I have said something else? And or maybe I should correct that, or you know, it's so many things to be a human, all these things that go on in our psyche and our mind and our soul.
There's so much.
Because human relationships are the essence of being human.
They are, they certainly are. And none of it needs to be pushed away or put to the back burner. It's something that we embrace as part of being human, and then we use the meditation practices and yoga practices or whatever practices is that we're using to deepen our experience of being human. So our connections to people are vital. Our connections to people are our life source. And those things, those connections to people don't have to be physical. You have connections to your family, friends, loved ones. I have those, and they all exist right now, but they're not here in this room. It doesn't mean they don't exist. So those relationships are still being fed by our energy also. Still, we have the best of intentions to be the best that we can be in our lives and interact with people in a way that's meaningful, and those connections fulfill us and make us feel like we've just, our souls had dinner, you know, like it makes us feel really nourished. There are those relationships that don't do that as well. But like you said, you know, talking about the to-do lists and the ideas of being perfect around certain things, as a recovering perfectionist, like I certainly relate to that, and being able to just take the foot off the pedal a bit and not have to do everything so just right, because oftentimes you can't control everything, and there's a big element of that, I think, in our lives, to have to control all the moving parts and make them all, you know, be the next best orchestra. Look how I have created my life. They're external circumstances which will always change and that we don't always have control over. And so sitting back in meditation reminds us that we're not in control of everything, that we're not even in control of what we think. So what is it that we're in control of? Where we place our attention is what we are ultimately in control of. That's all. That's all. We can move parts around in our lives and make changes, for sure. It doesn't always work out. But as long as we coming from the place in ourselves which is, as best we know, our highest intention, let go of the result. We don't know how things are going to pan out.
Exactly. And we don't know how someone's going to respond. My husband's really good at this topic. He's well, first, it's attention and intention, isn't it? Like, you know, he always used to say, if you're, you know your intentions were good, so what are you worried about? Because I don't do it now, but years ago, I'm sort of perhaps a recovering perfectionist too, but I'm going back in time quite a few years. But I would always sort of have anxiety and worry, not all the time, but if there was a conflict or something, I would be like, oh, did I say the right thing? Should I have said this? Should I have said that? And Peter's always said, you know, your heart was in the right place, your intentions were good, stand up for yourself, move on. You can't be responsible for the other person. You can't be responsible for how they take it or how they don't take it or what they heard. Sometimes you can say something and they change it in their mind to have different words because they're coming from a different place. So we can't shake other people and go, listen, this is what I meant. You can't backtrack.
That's not our responsibility.
It's not. He said, don't drive yourself nuts. You can't fix it. Just let it go. You know what you meant. You can't go running around going back to people and saying, oh, I meant that, and come on, and, you know, can we make this all good and lovely?
And oftentimes we reflect on situations like what you just said, and we think, with self-doubt, I shouldn't have said that. I should have said that. I didn't do the right thing by that person. But it comes back to intention. You know in yourself, if you're honest enough with yourself, was that my intention or was that not my intention? And even if it wasn't, if you're able to be honest with yourself, you've learned from the experience.
Exactly. Oh.
And it opens you up to being more compassionate in the future. So it's not like, especially women do this. Like, we take it, everybody's problems on as our responsibility, especially loved ones, and then think, when we don't fix everybody's problems and not everybody around me is happy, it's all my fault. No, we can't do that anymore. Like, we do the very best we can. We share love like it's going out of fashion. We just pour it out all over the place. And then if it doesn't come back, it's okay. And if other people around us are still dealing with their stuff, you still be there for them. But it's not your responsibility to fix anybody. Never. So I think this is changing. I think the landscape around this conversation is becoming more known, and I think lot more women particularly are taking this on. Not to say men aren't, definitely they are, but this is, you know, I'm in a female body and I have this experience and I see it around me, in the women around me too. So no offense to the men out there, I know there's some very sensitive ones out there. So it's an emerging dialogue with people around this issue, that we're all connected and we all have the best of intentions for each other, and where things don't work out or where there's been misunderstanding, there was no ill intent, and I think that's paramount.
And like you said, we learn. Okay, so if something did go right or something went not how we planned, we learn and we move forward. It's all so simple. We need this lesson at school, in primary school, don't we? How to think logically, CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, how to go through steps and be our own best friend and think clearly and, you know, challenge our thinking. That's what CBT is, isn't it? You know, we've talked about that before on the show.
We have. Well, CBT is fantastic. I did study it a little bit. But also too, one fabulous piece of work by, it's actually not a piece of work, it's a kind of concept and book, many books she's written. Byron Katie, she wrote The Work, and it's a process you go through where you question your thinking, particularly the stressful thoughts. So I won't go through it, but if anyone's interested, look up The Work by Byron Katie. It's particularly for where there's a niggle, where you've been activated, you're triggered, especially if this happens to you repeatedly around a particular subject. It's good to use this technique. And you basically question what you're thinking. Is it true? Is it really true? How does it make you react? And if you didn't have that thought, who would you be? And it's profound what you can discover if you're able to sit in those questions and be very, very honest about the answers and feel the answers, not think them, what they should be.
Like, what's a little mini example, like a very simplified example of that, to challenge our thinking? For example, I don't know, anything.
So what would be a niggling thought, or it might be something even innocuous, like that person shouldn't have cut me off.
Yeah, exactly. Like something like that.
On the road. Well, is that true for a start? That person should not have cut you off on the road. And you might say, yes, that's true. And then you would ask, can you be absolutely sure that person shouldn't have cut you off on the road? Absolutely, you can't really be sure. You don't know where they were going. You don't know what has happened. You don't know if they even saw you. So
and sometimes we think they did it intentionally, or didn't they do it intentionally? It's challenging that thought too, because our anger comes from, oh, how dare they?
That's right. They crossed
that
in front of my path.
Injustice,
yeah. And then, what does that thought make you do? That if you're thinking they shouldn't have cut me off, then you get angry, and you might speed up. You might, miss it, or you might not see other things that are happening around you on the road that makes it more dangerous. You carry it with you into your day, and you go into the office, or you go into your family and you're angry, and it comes with you. So that's the consequence of thinking and believing that thought. And then you ask yourself, well, if I didn't have that thought, who would I be? what would I be? And
What do you mean by that? Can you just explain that bit there?
if I didn't have the thought that person shouldn't have cut me off,
Yeah.
who would I be? What difference would it make if I didn't think that? If I'm driving along, someone pulls out in front of me and they shouldn't have, but I don't have the thought they shouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Your resistance drops. You stop thinking that things should be a certain way, that they should be your way, that it happened, and it's not going to change the fact if you're thinking they shouldn't have done that. So it allows you to take a step back from your automatic thoughts and question them, because what we believe affects us. And if you start to believe that nobody should cut you off in the traffic, then you're already on the defensive. It shuts you down to some degree.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, we don't know. That person might have a relative in hospital and they had to quickly change lanes and go somewhere, or they're a little bit blind and on their peripheral vision, or we don't know the full story. Yeah, so it's our little stories that we make for ourselves that we think life should be a particular way. Well, we don't know. We don't really know.
True. But I just want to clarify that bit there where you said, who would we be if we didn't have the thought? Do you mean that in the sense that, like, so if we didn't have that thought, then we will be more calm and at peace because we didn't get upset by that niggly thought? Is that what you're saying? That we want to be the person who doesn't get upset, doesn't have the thought, like just says, okay, big deal, they cut in front of me, let's move on. Are you saying to be that person when you say what would we be if we didn't have that thought? What would we be if we didn't get upset? Is that what you mean?
That's
to
a
be
good
more
question.
enlightened? Is that how you meant it? Because that's how I took it.
Not
Or did you mean it somehow?
No, because then it's all coming from your head. And the whole purpose of the work is to reflect on situations after they've happened, not when they're happening, but after they've happened, and go, I was triggered and it's all right, I was triggered. But to understand where it came from and then feel the difference in yourself if you didn't have that thought. It's a feeling sense, and that's the trick. With the work, it can be quite a mental process, but at the same time you have to drop below all that narrative where you think you shouldn't do those things. I shouldn't have got angry at that person. I shouldn't have done this. You have to let that just be. I got angry, and that's the stone end of it. Like, that's okay. But if you didn't have that thought, what would it feel like to be driving your car when someone cuts you off and you don't even think about it? Like, you don't have to be that person. You don't have to act. Don't act. Don't pretend that it's okay when it's not. That's important. But how does it actually feel? How would it feel if you imagine yourself in that situation, someone pulls out in front of you, and that's it. You just break.
Right. So how would I feel if I didn't have that thought? Is like us trying to be the person that doesn't get rattled. Yes or no? I'm still on it, aren't I?
No.
Don't you mean that?
No, it's more like that thought happened. It won't bother me. That thought, I won't be bothered.
Yeah, that thought won't be bothered. That's right.
So
I'll be more happy and relaxed.
That's exactly right. Yes. So it's the thought that makes you angry. It's also the opposite can make you happy. So if you get rid of that thought, if you get rid of that idea by feeling it, you have to feel, I feel angry. What's happened? And then you feel what's gone on, what's happened. Okay. But if I didn't have that thought, this would have been the outcome.
Yes.
And it drops away.
Got you.
It's a big, it's a simple but involved process.
Oh, good example. Yeah.
Anyway.
All right.
That's
I'm going to use that
one
one
way
maybe on the way home.
One, I hope not.
No, yeah, well, that's right. No, but just being patient generally, even if you get every red light, it's like, come on, I had to get one green light here.
That was like me coming here. I was almost in a panic.
Really?
I thought, oh gosh, because of the backup of all the traffic out here.
That's it.
But no, it was fine. Yeah.
So let's just quickly touch on, because we've sort of got only a little bit of time left. So if we could just briefly touch on how meditation can help with blood pressure. So obviously having high blood pressure, sometimes, you know, it's from stress. If we've had an argument with someone, we take our blood pressure, it's up, and then we've made peace with them, we take our blood pressure, it's down. Like, there's a lot of evidence out there that it does fluctuate throughout the day.
Certainly. And at different times of the day with different levels of stress. You know, you've heard of white collar syndrome, where people get their blood pressure taken by the doctor and it's high because they're in front of the doctor.
That's right.
There's also the phenomena of people going to the doctor and their blood pressure's fine, and when they're out in their community doing their job, their blood pressure's really high. So there's a whole lot of undetected blood pressure that happens. Like sometimes people feel relief to get in the doctor's office and just sit down and just someone look after me, or now it's a rest.
That's how I look at it.
But when they're out and doing their business in their life, they are having high blood pressure, and it's, you know, there is a group of people, demographic, you know, hard, like usually that really intensive working time in our lives, you know, in 30s, 40s, 50s, that happens to, and it's because there's the go, I have to get so much done mentality that happens through no fault of anybody's. It's the product of how our lives are, but certainly that meditation and yoga has been shown clinically that it can reduce hypertension. And it's also very clear, as you said, stress is the number one cause of hypertension. And sure, there are people who have congenital, like a predisposition, a genetic predisposition towards hypertension. That certainly exists, but at the same time, that has to be triggered by something, and it's often a stressful event or a lingering, niggling, chronic pattern of thinking that's very real. Like, it's not something you say to someone, well, just stop thinking it, because obviously they're feeling something very different. So meditation and yoga are wonderful practices if practiced consistently and, you know, with positive intent. They'll definitely reduce blood pressure. There are plenty of studies out there to show.
Key point what you said with positive intent, because we hear people saying, oh well, I tried, it didn't work, but they didn't really sort of try hard enough, and they admit later on, wasn't really into it, so I just told myself it wouldn't work. Yeah, we've got to be in the right mindset. We have to want it. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, you know, it's logical too. If you've got arteries that are narrowed, or arteries that are not elastic enough, or they've somehow shrunk over time or had an injury, if we stretch our body, open the body, that it's not just muscles and tendons and bones, and it's all our blood vessels that are receiving that mobilization. And so having that elastic blood vessels as much as possible can help to ease blood pressure. So meditation also addresses the mental aspect of high blood pressure. I don't have any statistics on it, Bianca, but I would say, gosh, 80% of people's high blood pressure is exacerbated by stress, definitely, but may be actually the cause of the blood pressure. And it might not, and it is absolutely no fault of their own. Like, life is rough on some people, and it causes people to respond in a stressful way. But in their particular case, their vulnerability is hypertension. Someone else's case might be a digestive issue, might be IBS, but for them it's hypertension. So to be able to calm the mind or reduce that chatter, the static in our minds, can calm the whole system and give a break to the system that's under that constant pressure.
And how does breath work? Just last question before we wrap it up. Breath work. How does the breath work help with dealing with blood pressure issues?
So our blood pressure is controlled by the heart, and the heart has a particular rhythm, and we choose to focus in on the breath, and we can then change the shape of our breath. We can increase the length of the breath, we can decrease the length of the breath, holds, and all of that has an effect on our heart and the way our blood is circulating. So it's all part of the same package, really. It's hard to separate it out. The breath work is so valuable, and it's something I think that's a bit overlooked when it comes to regular practice.
Very true, very true. We have to focus on our breathing. I have to remind myself of that often, and it's a good thing when you check in. You think, gee, that there's a power there. Just within 30 seconds a minute, we can fix ourselves and calm ourselves from breath.
And some people think, oh, I did that, but they might have taken 1 or 2 breaths. But if you sit for 5 minutes, even just 5 minutes, 10 minutes is amazing. But if you can sit for 5 minutes and just focus on your breathing, like really, again, with positive intent that you really want to do it, then it will change.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you, Abby. Sorry, we have run out of time, but I feel like we might need a part 2 because there was more. There was more, but that's okay. We'll push on for the next show. But thank you for coming in again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Abby.
Lovely to be here. Thanks again.
You're welcome.